Welcome back. Today we're going to begin Chapter 2. Now, this chapter deals with economic models. For economists, models provide predictions about the economy that help them to devise and test economic policies. And the models help determine the practicality and profitability of implementing those policies. And let's face it, the models help illustrate economic concepts that otherwise might be really difficult to understand. Let me put it this way. Often we think of models as exact replicas, but really, models can't be entirely realistic. Look at these two models of airplanes. The first one is a perfect replica of a jet, down to the smallest detail. But really, small is the key word there. It's not an exact replica, is it? It's comparatively tiny and it doesn't work. There is no engine or controls inside. Then this plane doesn't look anything like an airplane. Where would someone sit? Yet, it demonstrates the principles of aerodynamics. Both are models, and both provide different perspectives. So in this lesson, we're going to talk a little more about the purposes of models. And we'll talk about the first two types of economic models, the tabular model and the line graph. Okay, so let's get started. So why do we make models in the first place? I know there are people that are really into making models, but what's their purpose? We define models as representations of objects or concepts, often in a greatly simplified form, like our airplane here. A visual representation is really much more practical because often a person wants to physically see how the parts interact, but it's really impractical to study a real airplane because it's too big, it's too expensive, too complex, or a combination of all of these. So why do economists use models? We've already talked about how models provide predictions about the economy and the practicality and profitability of implementing economic policies, but it goes way beyond those reasons. You have to understand, economists need to study the actions of businesses and government, and economic models help them analyze the actions that were made and their consequences. The whole cause and effect thing. Another reason, instruction. Economics teachers use models to present abstract concepts, as well as providing ways to analyze the interactions of economic variables, especially those that can set or alter a nation's economy. Final reason, at least the final reason we're going to talk about, is predictions. I know, we've already talked about predictions, but let's talk about it again because it's so important. Economists need to ask economic questions that are sometimes hard to answer with definitive answers. Questions like, what would happen to inflation if the number of dollars in circulation increased by 25%? That's where the models come into play. But of course, models can't be completely accurate or predict completely accurate. They're made by flawed men who aren't perfect. Besides, as knowledge increases, we have to adjust economic models. We obviously don't know everything, so economists work with what they've got. And as information becomes available, the models may have to change. Let me give you an illustration. 100 years ago, a farmer could have an economic model that he would harvest about 100 bushels of oranges in a season. Not sure if that's a lot or not, but it's a simple number and I'm using it. Little did the farmer know that a cold front was coming in and there would be a frost overnight. poor guy had no idea until the temperatures plummeted and he scrambled to light fires and keep them lit throughout the night. He was only able to save half his crop. His economic models had to change because in the morning he knew that he only had the potential of 50 bushels instead of 100. His economic models had to change. Put an orange farmer into the same situation today, and he'll be prepared for the cold snap, as long as he checks the weather. He can move his heaters out to the orchards and keep his crop warm throughout the night. His economic model doesn't change because the knowledge of the cold snap allowed him to save his crop. So, what do the economic models look like? Well, they're not plastic, that's for sure. They usually take the form of theories or explanations of how people make choices. These theories usually are expressed as tables or graphs. Let's look at 3 simple basic tables and graphs that are popular methods of explaining economic principles and relationships. The first one's the tabular model, also known as a schedule. It's a table or chart explaining the relationship between pairs of variables. Yeah, let me show you and walk you through it, okay? The book uses the illustration of Coastal Cola. Look at the table. If Coastal Cola sells its soda for 75 cents a can, the prediction is that it'll sell 3 million cans of soda. If it sells its soda for 90 cents, it'll sell 2 million, and so on. If you add the profits up, it's obvious that 75 cents is the correct selling price. The price of the soda directly affects the amount sold. I know, everyone knows that, but that's why we're talking about a basic table. Now, while tabular models help to show relationships between variables, they provide information that's limited to only a few observations. The economists that figure out the table didn't tell us whether charging 80 cents would still mean 3 million in sales. We only know the numbers that we've been given or that were tested. A line graph is a graph formed by the plotting of data involving 2 variables and the connecting of the resulting points to form a line of infinite information from the data. Okay, in other words, you get a whole lot more data from a line graph. To construct a line graph, economists place price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. Then they plot the graph with the amounts that they know. Often they'll use the tabular model as a guide. Let's look at the information taken from the tabular model for Coastal Cola and apply it to the line graph. If we take that information and mark what we know, 75 cents at 3 million, and then 90 cents at 2 million, we can figure out that information that we didn't receive from the table. If we connect the dots literally, then we can see that if Coastal Cola charges 80 cents, then we know that they will sell 2.5 million cans. Both the tabular model and the line graph are basic economic models, yet they're very important in predicting economic decisions in both microeconomics and macroeconomics. Okay, so let's do a quick review of what we talked about in today's lesson. We defined models as representations of objects or concepts, often in a greatly simplified form. Most people need to see how all the parts interact, and that's hard to do with the real thing. We also talked about why economists use models. There are 4 reasons. They use them to provide predictions about the economy that help them to devise and test economic policies. And The models help determine the practicality and profitability of implementing those policies. They also help economists who want to study the actions and businesses of government. And economic models help them analyze the choices that were made and their consequences. Economics teachers also use models to present abstract concepts, as well as providing a way to analyze the interactions of economic variables. Then we talked about what economic models look like. The tabular model, or the schedule, is a table or chart explaining the relationship between pairs of variables. Then there's the line graph, which is a graph formed by plotting the data involving two variables and the connecting of the resulting points to form a line of infinite information from the data. Basically, a line graph provides a whole lot more data. Okay, so you'll need to be able to do a schedule and a line graph in your homework for this lesson. So if you need to rewind and watch this lesson again, feel free. Next time, we'll continue looking at economic models and study the production possibilities curve. See you next time. Have a great day.